are you? Have you written any more chronicles? Anything you've got to share? If not, we move on to how a monarchy really dies, and let's see how my idea of the death of a monarchy holds up to what, I guess, the death of a real monarchy is.
A dilemma. Imagine you sit on the throne of Momolopolis, a growing medieval-esque feudal power. You rule by divine right, but the world is changing. Your cities are growing, trade all across the world, and with that, merchants and guilds are becoming wealthy and powerful. People are starting to talk about freedom and rights, and they're getting titchy about not getting a say in how things are run like the lords are, even though they provide a lot of your taxes.
I'm your king. Well, I didn't vote for you.
What do you do?
Don't
This
vote
is
for a
the
king!
monarch's dilemma. How do you hold on to power while meeting the needs of an increasingly complex society? Giving them power risks your authority, but not giving it to them...
See, yeah, maybe this doesn't really work for us because our monarchy doesn't wield authority. Our monarchy wields power, as in military might, as in force. But they have allowed democracy to be a thing. Problem is deeper, comrade. I have to deal with corruption, fascist, billionaires, and ignorance all at the same time. However, go Power
Faced
Ranger.
with rising unrest, maybe you consider an historic move, creating a parliament. Because that'll keep them happy and keep them on your side, and surely it won't spark a chain of events which might lead to the downfall of the monarchy itself. Fantasy and sci-fi loves to think of monarchies ending with these dramatic revolutions, but monarchies were just as often outpaced by new systems, like democracy, with the monarch's dilemma often slowly eroding their power as they try to hold on to their authority in the face of rising complexity. We like these simple stories where you get rid of the evil king and then suddenly, magically, there's democracy, but the reality is, history is complicated. But first, we've got to rewind. We've got to go back to understand how all of this starts.
Well, I didn't vote for you.
Monarchs, kings and queens are not just people, they are systems. They're built on a set of political and economic and religious and ideological foundations and assumptions like divine right and that power comes from owning land and resources or the influence of the church. The Thai and British monarchies have very different philosophical justifications and responsibilities owing to their religious differences, Christian versus Buddhist, and the Vatican monarch, the Pope, owns a lot of land. Like 177 million hectares worth, but it's incredibly dispersed and it's not particularly connected with resource production, like wheat or mines or whatever, like monarchies often were. Instead, that land provides influence on a global scale through things like schools and hospitals and so on. Like the Catholic Church was the largest landowner in southern Vietnam when it was ruled as part of French Indochina. But we're creating fictional worlds here. We can be creative with these assumptions, and you already know that because you've bought and read my books. Like in the Elder Scrolls, the Khajiit, you know, those cat-like people, they develop physically depending on the phase of the moon they're born under. Different types could look wildly different. We don't even see most of them in the games. From basically being no bigger than a house cat to being these giant bipedal creatures. I wish we could see them. And some, like the quadrupedal Elfikrat, were said to make the best leaders, the natural kings. And when sometimes a very rare alignment of the two moons happened, it meant that a main was born, a single spiritual leader for the Khajiit. Maybe power doesn't stem from land, but the caste you're born into. Maybe it comes from a magical sword, or the stars you're able to see in the sky from your land.
Or wielding the power of consciousness.
Distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
In Frank Herbert's Dune, the Padishah Emperor's authority isn't so much built on the power of the feudal lords beneath him. In fact, arguably, it's possibly in spite of the amount of power that these lords beneath them have. Instead, it's more about the powerful spacing guild who control faster than light travel between the feudal planets. He gives them a monopoly, they support him. Then there's the Bene Gesserit, this order of women with mind powers who are married off as wives and are meant to support this system. In Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher universe, magic users like Triss and Yennefer are kept as powerful advisors to all the kings and queens of the world. These factions are incorporated into the monarchical system instead of making them an enemy. They become the pillar which upholds it all. Be creative with what underpins your monarch's power in this system. What pillars hold them up? Because that is where the king's
Fraud.
It starts when civilizations advance and grow more complex, more interconnected, more economically prosperous, with new resources, new technologies, new demands, and what exactly...
But at the end of the day, I mean, wielding the power through one thing or wielding it through another. It's like, if I say, oh, I have military might that could wipe you off the map, does it matter if it's a nuke or, like, 100,000 missiles or 10 million infantry. The end result is you're wiped off the map.
Just owning land and basic resources, but from trade, starting companies, being part of new institutions like universities. All of this only intensifies when the Industrial Revolution comes along, or any mass acceleration of technology which fundamentally transforms how the economy works, which changes what
Which was
power
the
is and
Adventurers
how
Guild.
people think about themselves and their place in their nation. And by the way, this applies to modern political systems as well, modern democracies. Like, the growth of the internet has meant that
I was going to say, is like with the Monarch, it's he has the power to wield consciousness and magic beyond the belief of anyone else because he understands the fundamental like concepts of the universe. So whether that comes from the tree or the fact that he's anima himself doesn't matter. The outcome is he wields enough power to literally pull the tree out of the fucking ground and crush everyone inside of it.
Science and the people who run them are increasingly important political players that modern governments still need to think about and take care of. Trade routes expand with faster ships which travel further, more wealth flows into the cities instead of rural lordly castles, more people are getting educated, the birth of the stock market, massive companies beginning to wield private armies abroad, new technologies making your average peasant more capable than ever. And suddenly there's this new class of wealthy elites who have all this free time to be pissed at the government and the resources to do something about it. And this is where we need to talk about two different concepts of power. There's de jure power, who has the legal authority within the system, and then there's de facto power, who actually has power in your society. Like, you could argue that your average Congress...
So, the de jure power would be the democracy. The de facto power would be the monarch and the viceroy. The monarch and the viceroy allow the democracy to exist because in the long run, it is a better way to rule. Because all they care is the complacency of the people.
has more de jure power, but someone like Mark Zuckerberg has more de facto power in society. Because all of this leads to a situation where the de jure power structures don't quite reflect the de facto power structures within society. And voila, we're back at the king's dilemma, because what is a monarch meant to do with the economic and political and religious and philosophical pillars of power which have held them up, which have justified their authority for so long, begin to change? When they begin to crumble, how do they stay on top? Imagine if in Dune, space travel between the feudal planets got really cheap because of new technologies. Or the Khajiit economy developed to the point that they didn't really need this caste system anymore. What would happen to the monarchs on top? In fact, a shift kind of like this did happen in Dune. The Emperor's position is underpinned by the Sardaukar, an elite force of soldiers who nobody can challenge, until House Atreides builds an army which kinda can.
The
One of those
Fremen.
pillars is beginning to crumble because the Emperor doesn't have a monopoly on that kind of force anymore. Now, this doesn't lead to democracy in the story.
It's like one Sardaukar can kill 100 men, but one Fremen can kill 10 Sardaukar. And the Sardaukar is the most feared warriors in the universe.
At all, but it does lead to the downfall of the monarchy after the Emperor plots to destroy the Atreides rather than integrate them more deeply into the system. It's in this gap
He
you'll
bet
find
against
friction,
them.
tension, social unrest you can explore, because one of these groups have to give way. If the institutions of power don't reflect where the real power lies, they're naturally going to come in conflict with each other. So let's figure it out. Who has de facto power in your system but not de jure, and what position are these people allowed to occupy in society? Are they bribing officials so they've got some influence in the system, or are they coordinating a rebellion so they can have more? Or are they seeking power overseas, which is what a lot of these new elites do?
Well, a lot of them, yeah, they're, The problem is the Beastmen supporters are getting support from the Adventurers Guild and from the Beastmen outside, whereas the Beastmen, like, haters they only have the power inside of the tree. And they're usually not adventurers. So it's like, they're almost like a Karenocracy of just really loud, obnoxious voices that, like, everyone's just like, oh my god, shut the fuck up. No one cares. No one cares if you feel uncomfortable about your space being taken over. Fuck off. No one cares that your romances turned into great battle scenes because now we have like lore, history, and religion, you know? Like all the things that have come from the Beastmen are like most of the culture of the tree. And those people don't even acknowledge that, even in the fact of them saying they hate the Beastmen and the Beastmen influence. Well, what do you think about, like, you know, religion? Oh, I love... What do you think about history? Oh, we should always have history. Well, those are Beastmen concepts. We didn't have those before the Adventurers Guild. So, you know, these people don't stand on any fucking principle or anything like that. Whereas the Beastmen sympathizers are like, there's no fucking reason why Beastmen can't be adventurers. Sure, they're a little bit less intelligent as far as, like, understanding larger concepts, but, like, they're basically the ones who taught us how to survive in the actual world, because if anyone leaves the tree, they're basically fucking dead. Because they have to worry about disease, they have to worry about fatigue, they have to worry about hunger, they have to worry about thirst, they have to worry about old age and decay and death. It's like things that are absolutely foreign in the utopia of the tree.
You know, places like French Indochina or a lot of the New World.
Which is why, like, arguing is the hugest thing, because the only way to kill someone, basically, is to cut off their head. So even if you accidentally did something, you can't really fucking kill someone, because you just instantly heal from the life force of the consciousness around you. So it's extremely, like, yelling match, but there's no point in really escalating to violence because you can't essentially hurt anyone or kill anyone. And if you cut someone's head off, well, that's very clearly you were intending to kill them, and you're fucked. They just cut your head off. You don't do that.
Into those places and exploited them for resources, sometimes even like ruling as a state within a state, they were often comprised of these kind of like new elite class. The monarch can try to suppress them, and actually they did a lot of the time, but that's risky. That's trying to stop technological and potentially social advancement. And so, what do? They call a parliament. A lot of the time, the parliament is the monarch trying to incorporate these people into the system while keeping themselves at the head and center of it, clinging to their power, at the cost of ceding just a little bit of it. But once you've opened that door, it's open. It's open to criticism, to debate, and eventually limits. The slippery slope begins. When I talk about the institutions of power not necessarily reflecting where real power lies in society, this can go both ways as either good or bad. Like the rising middle class with real emerging power demanding more of a say in government is a democratic thing. I think that is good, but at the same time, you could say that tech companies wield an inordinate amount of power in modern societies today. But that doesn't mean that they should be given more de jure power. It is worth noting here that monarchies were barely ever as powerful as we often see in fiction, never as absolute. Like even the concept of absolutism, this philosophical idea that kings should be all-powerful, that was a very late invention, and it itself was barely ever applied. It's a simplification because it is...
Unless, of course, your monarch is actually, like, a planet, the consciousness of a fucking planet, in this case, a fucking black hole. Greatest consciousness, one of the oldest consciousnesses in existence. The only problem is his consciousness is spread so thin across so many star systems, so many galaxies, so many planets, so many creatures. That's why he only infected the monarch and the viceroy, as far as consciousness goes. But then there's a chance that other things might get infected along the way, but I don't know if that's really going to be a thing, because that puts a lot of other, like, loopholes that I gotta fill. So we'll kind of see where it goes with that.
You're right. Even a Game of Thrones, which people praise for its medieval realism, shows the king as a lot more powerful than they ever usually were. Like this guy, Charles the Bold, was a French noble, the Duke of Burgundy in the 1400s, who kind of treated the French king as more of a rival than as like his superior. He's got a wild story. We do not have time to get into it today, but it's great. It should come as no surprise that monarchs had to be beaten into accepting limits on their power. You know the Magna Carta, that super important constitutional document, says is, hey, you can't tax us without us asking or throw us in prison without evidence, and you can't mess with the church too much. Well, there are actually 6 of them, because the lords kept on having to beat the king's ass because he kept on ignoring it. Cersei's fate in A Feast for Crows, where the Iron Bank backs her rival Stannis and the Faith refuses to bless Tommen's kingship and arrests her, is a damning reminder of what happens if the de jure powers do not keep an eye on the de facto pillars holding up the whole system. And that includes new pillars which show up and force the king to incorporate them into the system. So there is a whole other half to the king's dilemma.
That would be
you
the
want to think
Adventurers
about.
Guild.
It's a little bit complicated, so stay with me. Rising complexity also means the state is more powerful than it has ever been in the past. It's around this period that you start to see the state doing things like setting up banks and managing interest rates and setting up school systems and social welfare systems and managing global colonial efforts and building soft power abroad. You know,
Callie!
building incredibly powerful militaries,
Oh,
taking their place.
I'm glad you're here, Callie. So I found it. Someone reposted it on Twitter. And I was so glad, because I was looking for this for fucking ever. That's how I imagine you, Callie. That's 100% how I imagine you.
The geopolitical hierarchy. Big, elaborate stuff that was just never possible before. And if the monarch doesn't start doing this, then they will quickly be outpaced by the monarchies and countries which do. Parliament might seem like a way to make the monarch weaker, but they also make the monarch
true.
more powerful. It gives them a formal and palatable way to get more support, more money and resources to use that rising complexity for their own ends and from those that their power depends on in a more developed economy. So again, there's another side to this dilemma. You can give up power and become part of this bigger system that can do more.
That's what the monarch
does.
does.
That power and you risk fading into irrelevance as other monarchs.
And that's kind of like the thing, is like, how do we keep the people happy? Because that's all that matters. And we just listen to what the people do. But we have veto at the end of the day. And they know that we have veto. So they know that their power is only granted through us. But they know that we won't take effect on it unless something, you know, the system starts to get really corrupt and the monarch's like, nah, okay, guys, we're resetting. Fuck you. Everything's going back to basics. Everyone's kicked out. Sorry, guys. Good or bad, doesn't matter. You're kicked out. We're getting everyone new. And I wonder if that should have been a thing before. Maybe that was a thing that initiated the Adventurers Guild. Because that was the first thing that happened, was the Adventurers Guild. And that's where democracy, like, eventually came from. Because they started with, like, well, we need a say for the people. And the monarch's like, sure, I guess. I don't know how you want to do this, though. And they're like, well, what about concubines? And they're like, oh, now you're talking. But, you know. I mean, you don't want to say it, but it's like, you get the fat, ugly one, bitch. You get the fat, ugly one, huh? You got voted in, the fat, ugly one. So, fuck. And then there's the idea of, like, the scamming the system with, the current, like, the inaugurated viceroy's wife, or concubine. Because she's technically, like, not even voted in as the concubine yet, but she's still acting as if she is. Even though she does get voted in, because she is actually, like, you know, powerful in her own right. And there are more, like, let's say 60% of people are neutral, then 15% of people against Beastmen, and 25% of people are for Beastmen. So even if it was, if all of the neutral people, because the neutral people aren't going to vote no. If anything, the neutral people are going to vote yes, right? Or correct me if I'm wrong on that, but if you're neutral on a stance, generally, you would be more willing to be for it than against it. That's just my perception of it. Because there's a difference between, like, sitting on the fence because you don't know how to choose and being neutral and just not caring. Like, you literally don't care. So you're like, well, I don't care, so why not vote for it? Right? Because if I cared, I'd vote against it. But that's just how I think of it. So, hopefully that's not outside of the box too much. People will be like, well, why would you just automatically do that? I'm like, well, and even if they don't, there's still a larger percent of them that would vote for a sympathizer than against a sympathizer. And they don't even know that she is a sympathizer. You know, it's kind of like dog whistling, I guess. You'd have, like, a bunch of dog whistles for sympathizers, but it would all be under the idea of, like, you know, we already let them their stuff in. Like, we bring adventurers' stuff in. Like, why not? We let them into the main cities and everything. We've never had a problem with them, more so than we have. Like, look at the crime rates between, like, adventurers and people that leave the tree and beastmen, and look at the graph for, like, they'll be like, oh, the percentage of them. Well, it's like, no, actually, if you look at, like, per capita stats, if anyone knew anything about per capita stats, you could maybe figure this shit out. But the beastmen actually, like, outnumber the adventurers on the outside, because there's, like, maybe 1.5 million, 2 million people living inside the tree. There's like 500, 400,000 adventurers outside of the tree. There's like 3 billion fucking beastmen. Like, they cover the entirety of the fucking continent. And even some of them are amphibious to the point that they're in the water too. And then there's the octopi that are at the bottom of the ocean that aren't even part of any of this yet. They come up in the second book. So, because they would basically be considered beastmen to the now fully developed and, like, genetically engineered and morphed main species, especially octopi. Even though they have the same level of intelligence as an octopi, they don't have the same body because they can't breathe air. They're still water breathing, whereas octopi can't breathe water.
Countries do all of that. You could look at this through the lens of saying that the growth of the state also inherently means that the monarch is deciding less and less for themselves, like as a personal decision, because they're going to have to rely more on appointees, on experts, on professionals to manage complex projects and systems on a national scale. In fact, one of the hallmarks of absolutism, where you've kind of got these, like, European kings who are really, really powerful, is a big professional bureaucracy. And what's really interesting is we can almost view this kind of bureaucratic absolutism as an attempt at an alternative to the democratic parliamentarism, which it was often formed in the face of during this period, as a way to kind of sort of capitalize on that rising complexity while still, you know, keeping all of that power in the hands of the monarch. And of course, in the end, it didn't work. Absolutist monarchs faded out of relevance by around, you know, the 17th, 18th centuries. And this is why another feature of the absolutist ideology in the absolutist era is that the power gets concentrated in the hands of the monarch, but the feudal lords all around the country, their power gets eroded, it gets taken away. And it's really interesting because we can still see that as part of this transition towards a more democratic system, because we're eroding that feudal system, and consolidating the power is a way to resist that change even further. Almost like it knows that these other parts of the system are going to fade away, but it's trying to hold on to this thing at the very heart of it, the monarch themselves. But there is this underlying question you can play with. What does your monarch want to do with all this new state power, and how much authority are they willing to give up in order to be able to do it? And this introduces a third prong to the king's dilemma, because giving power to the people might mean protecting your position, but it also potentially means exposing yourself to vulnerabilities and opposition from other nobles who benefit from the previous system you set up. The pillars holding you up might attack each other or might attack you because you're trying to incorporate a new pillar. And sometimes they're gonna be even more powerful than you. Like, remember Charles the Bold? You think he wants a parliament under a French king where he's just like one of the guys? No. So ask yourself, what backlash does your monarch face from other powers entrenched in the system when they try to change it, when they try to include these new people? Nobody likes to have their influence diluted. People who are inside the system often don't like letting more people inside the system. It's the NIMBYism of medieval politics. I should clarify, I'm speaking about multiple centuries of history here, and every monarchy has fallen its own way. Only some of this stuff is going to apply to any given examples. So take all this as things to consider, not hard and fast rules. And all of this leads us to part 2, the 3 ways monarchies die. Monarchies can die politically by losing power, which we've already talked about, culturally by losing relevance to the social fabric, and ideologically by losing the philosophical underpinnings which rationalize their power to the people. All of these often happening at the same time and feeding into each other. Like, ceding power at all is basically the same thing as admitting that maybe you don't have the divine right. In Samantha Shannon's Priory of the Orange Tree, the House of Berthnet's monarchy is not based on divine right, but on being the direct descendants of a saint who saved the world a long time ago. And that, by having a child each generation, it keeps this Dark Lord at bay, in their prison. But in deciding to end the monarchy at the end of the book, the Queen acknowledges that she has to deconstruct this myth that they've built around themselves, that maybe it's not their bloodline keeping them really imprisoned, and that's why they're so special and deserve the crown. She talks about telling her people that her line's authority was
Sharp! What's up?
1,000 years, and that the time is up,
True.
signified by her lacking
I'll
a
twerk
child
for you,
herself.
bro.
Basically, giving this myth an ending.
Written
She
anything, Sharp? How's it
deconstructs
going?
that philosophical
How you
underpinning
been?
very intentionally. Divine right in our world slowly faded from popular view as people kind of stopped believing there was any real difference between the average person and the monarch. The ideological foundations eroded slowly. Historically, the monarch's power has also been deeply linked to the church, the monarch being even the head of state and religion. And so the decline of religion, things like the Reformation...
Yeah, I was
the
in my
splintering
depression
of
arc,
various
so I didn't write much.
Protestant
It's all
churches,
good.
new faiths and secular ideals rising in popularity meant that
It is what it is, you know, it comes in
particular
bouts.
idea began to lose its
Right?
purchase. Like, it's pretty hard for Henry VIII to argue...
I haven't
his
written in
statement
like a
of
week
divine right to
either.
rule after leaving
We've
the
just been
Catholic
like
Church, making
ignoring
himself
it.
the head of the Anglican one, and also that he could divorce a couple of women. But all of this is a fascinating way to look at the ideological decline of the monarchy. Don't just think about what kind of power the monarch gives up and when, but how the ideological foundations of the monarchy itself begin to fade or change. Like, a lot of people still support constitutional monarchies today because they see them as an important part of their culture and history, as a neutral arbiter in politics, as a final line against authoritarianism, which is a very interesting thing to say about an unelected ruler. But anyways, those beliefs shape the role that monarchs can play in the actual politics itself. Like, I come from a Commonwealth country, and Commonwealth countries have something called a Governor-General, which is kind of like the Queen's representative, king now, and they sign off on laws. They also technically have the ability to, for example, dissolve Parliament, and they barely ever use it. In fact, they basically don't. They are not a real position of power. But the 1975 Australian constitutional crisis came about after the Governor-General basically dismissed Parliament on their own. It was a big thing, and a lot of people didn't like it because even though they de jure had the legal authority to do that, de facto they were not meant to have that authority. It felt like an exploitation in the system, and it got people questioning the ideological foundation of the monarchy. Because a monarchy's decline like this is just as much about change, how they evolve here, how they adapt to a new political structure. This is what they're doing to survive. But there is another question under all of this. What else are you pulling apart? This is the way that society has worked for a long time, and it's going to have flow-on effects if you undo this ideology, which is caught up in so many other things. What else comes to...
And that's kind of like the ideology that's being broken down in the book is the fact that beastmen are lesser species. Because there's a huge undertone of racism between octopi, avians, and insectoids. Because octopi think of themselves as superior because in general they have a higher IQ. And the insectoids are, on average, the dumbest, and then the avians are in the middle. So the avians and the insectoids get looked down on by the octopi. So thus, the avians and the insectoids look down on the beastmen. And this is kind of just, creates a social class structure. When the viceroy dictates that people have to treat beastmen as if they were any of the other races, everyone's like, well, fuck you. You're just pissed off because you look down on us because you think we're less than you, and then we found someone else that we can look down on. And now you're taking that away from us. And that's how, like, the anti-beastman faction feels. They feel that, like, they're and because they're mainly insectoids and avians, other than like the random high-ups that they can recruit, like the concubine of the viceroy, who is the one who basically made all of this happen. Which, again, I'm not sure if this is secretly in the back something that the monarch actually wanted to happen, because he could have easily stopped it, but he never did. He just wants to watch things play out, and if they get too crazy, he'll do what he needs to do, which was, the exodus of the Adventurers Guild. But even with that, he knew, knowing that Garuda had fallen, and there was another Beastman on, Beastman War on the road, he was like, well, if everything goes as planned, we'll kick all the people out who wanted to leave the tree. They'll all go out and die. And then the only people that will be left will be people who don't want to leave the tree. And we'll be back to square one, right where we wanted to be. Because we don't want to control the people. We want to manipulate the people. But, we're not gonna tell them what they can't do. We're just gonna nudge them in the right direction, right?
Down. If the monarch arises from a caste system, then this is inherently a challenge to that system, which affects everyone in society, how they should relate to each other, who they should marry, whether they're allowed to buy or sell or live with people of another caste. And I don't think it's any coincidence that this ideological deconstruction happens when you have a rising middle class in a society with rising complexity and people who are more educated, which again tends to happen with any sort of massive technological increase, especially over a short period. Rapid change
within 150 years.
Flintlock is an emerging subgenre of fantasy set in or around the Industrial Revolution, with books like Brian McClellan's Powder Mage trilogy. They see the overthrow of a monarchy as a natural evolution of this transition almost. A more educated population that leads to a kind of enlightenment, concepts of skepticism, atheism, materialism, questioning the structures of the world. And McClellan even hints at this in his opening chapter. Quote, "I did this for me," Tomas said, "and I did this for Ardro. I did this because those grumbling students of philosophy only play at the rebellion. The age of kings is dead, Adamat, and I have killed it." Another character remarks a little later in the story about how the monarchy is an aged and corrupt institution. He writes about how the king is magically kept young to, quote, "reflect the monarchy's agelessness," but all the characters in the book kind of find the king hard to look at, and it gets difficult to take seriously. People demand the institution cede power after they lose reverence for the trappings of institutional power and the ideas that it's meant to represent, like the agelessness of the monarchy. Globalized trade and communication also mean the spread of ideas, like democracy and enlightenment thinking. This was actually a big part of the democratic movement in the Philippines, where the construction of the Suez Canal shortened travel time between Asia and Europe massively, and wealthy Filipino families started sending their children to Spain for education, which exposed them to revolutionary ideas, exacerbated anti-colonial sentiment, and poured fuel on the Filipino rebellion, and culminating in the 1896 Philippine Revolution, which was...
And there is kind of a thing with, the social structure and, ruling structure of the Beastmen, and this comes back again to another conspiracy theory that there is another race in the background pulling the strings on the Beastmen. Because despite the Beastmen being so primitive, and despite them being so spread out and like almost like warring between themselves, they seem to have almost a somewhat unified culture. And this is kind of based on the idea of like ancient global civilization like 30,000 years ago, that built all the pyramids and stuff like that. And it's like, I mean, like pyramid, like worldwide pyramids, not just like Egyptian pyramids. Like the Egyptian pyramids are like in honor of like the original pyramids built by like this global civilization like 30,000, 50,000 years ago, something like that. And the idea behind that is that the dragons gave civilization to the Beastmen and taught the Beastmen how to be civil, and in doing so the Beastmen worshipped the dragons, but the dragons were like, no, don't worship us, if anything, worship the planet. But they didn't feel like the planet was like a thing, like they just didn't understand. So the dragons were like, you know what, the moon, you guys can worship the moon, that's the child of the planet, we worship the moon. And they worshiped the moon. And that's kind of, when the monarch came along and everything happened and then he pulled the moon out of the sky, that kind of fucked everything over for like the religious aspect of the Beastmen. They couldn't be controlled by the dragons anymore, and the dragons left because they had basically, but the other 5 dragons right now are trying to keep the currents of the seas active while the octopi species makes technology that can allow the currents to act the way that they did before the moon fell out of the sky. Because when the moon fell out of the sky, all the tides stopped, which fucked with the currents, and all of the water started becoming stagnant, and all of life started dying. So in order to, and the octopi knew that the planet would die before they could create machines that allowed the currents to continue. So they begged the dragons to basically swim in the oceans to create the currents while they built these great machines. And they're almost done the construction of them, so by the time the second book comes around, the dragons will be free to leave for like a set period of time before the currents weaken again. But before that even happens, they all die, and then Gaia blows up the planet anyways. So, but there is a reason why the other dragons, and Fafnir was supposed to come with them, but he didn't, because he was just such a stubborn little shit, because he's the youngest and most inbred of all the dragons. Or at least the great worms.
Anti-monarchical, dismantling the ideology and myth around a monarch can even be seen as an essential step towards democracy. After World War II, the US felt that the kind of authority and belief that surrounded the Japanese emperor would stand in the way of democratic reforms within the country. So, they made him publicly renounce his divinity. Quote, "The ties between us and our people have always stood upon mutual trust and affection. They do not depend upon the mere myths and legends. They are not predicated on the false conception that the emperor is divine and that the Japanese people are superior to other races and fated to rule the world." But perhaps the most interesting devolution is the cultural death. Even after monarchs lose a lot of their political power, even after their ideological framework crumbles beneath them, those pillars fall away, they can still be important to the cultural fabric of the country. Like, the Thai monarch is beloved, his picture is everywhere, we still keep the
Okay, what's really interesting about this is, again, when I'm doing this kind of research, and I'm looking at how I've built my world, at first I was like, oh man, maybe this video doesn't actually really tie into how my monarchy is. But the more and more we go through it, the more I realize that these things that he's saying are things that I've done with the monarchy throughout the timeline. Ever since the monarch, initiated and said, I'm the monarch, here's why, bitches, fuck y'all, and he single-handedly built the fucking dome that would send them to the surface. And he said, any of you that want to come along, feel fucking free. We're never going to be coming back. We're going to be completely changed after this. But this is the whole new frontier that we've all been waiting for. And we're here to go. Because they've already had, technology to the point of sending probes up into, above the water, which would essentially be space to them. So now with all this new technology and understanding and the power of the monarch, he just, inside of that, he became the monarch. And then slowly over time, as the society evolved and the needs of the society changed, so did the monarch's approach to ruling. And, giving up power and allowing diplomatic means being undermined by other people around you and either having a play in it or letting it be a thing, because in the long run that fighting against it is worse. So you're picking the less of two evils in that case. And something that challenges the monarch, like the Adventurers Guild itself and war. And it's the people don't want to go to war, but if war is going to be coming to them, what can they possibly do, right? And if they know that the previous war, the reason why the war ended is because the enemy couldn't get inside of the tree, and they know that the attempts of the Beastmen to try and get in the tree by the proclamations that the Viceroy made at the beginning of the book, because despite the fact that the Viceroy says that, the only Beastman that ever sets foot inside of the tree is the one pretending to be the avian who's the Lamia, who basically gets fucking absolutely massacred at the beginning of the fucking book. Because just between protests and rallies and everything like that, it's just not worth it for Beastmen to try to enter the tree. And the Beastmen never even the other thing is the Beastmen don't even really care that much. They're okay, cool, we can go in there. I mean, we've never been able to go in there before, but I mean, it's just I don't know, you guys, I don't know if we really want to have anything to do with it, because you gotta think, they're kind of like kids, right? It's children in their concepts. They're oh, big tree. They don't even think about the idea that you could go inside of it, that people live inside of it. It's too much of a grand idea for them to even comprehend, It's yeah, they know, but they don't really know. And since no one's been inside, it's just eh. So, except for the one. And he was damn, this is fucking impressive. But, it's just completely different. And it's it's very barren and weird. It's being in a cave system, right? Everything's basically the same inside of it. All the rocks are the same color. I mean, there's a little bit of different colorations and stuff, but it's the crystalline structure of the tree itself is all one kind of faded out, hued blue kind of color. Almost it's supposed to almost be the what's the name of the effect in nuclear power plants that makes the water turn blue, light up? It's because the neutron particles going through the water are slowed down to slower than light speed, causing a shift in the hue of the light, and it transfers to ultraviolet. It's not Chekhov radiation. I want to say Lambert radiation or something like that. I don't actually know. I can't remember. But and slowly the monarch has just become a symbol of enforcement. Whatever the people say, the monarch will enforce it, because they have the power to enforce it through themselves, but they just only do it through the people's needs, because they see that they just because Anima's goal at the end of the day is to just continuously grow the population and create more of them. He doesn't want to destroy the population, so he wants to make them be able to live on their own.
In Aotearoa, the word for civil servant in Thai still means servant of the king. They can be important symbols of national unity in times of crisis and war, plague, something to rally around. The Allies debated whether Emperor Hirohito should be tried as a war criminal, but decided that his cultural influence, even if they eroded his political power, could still be used to drag Japan forward and prevent it from falling to communism, of all things, which itself is inherently anti-monarchy, so keeping him around is inherently anti-communist. A lot of monarchies survive in this way as cultural institutions. But if monarchies are cultural institutions, that means they can also die when nations forge new symbols for themselves. The French Revolution didn't just remove the monarchy but keep their imagery around. No, they created Marianne, this fictional woman designed to personify the values of the revolution, who, by the way, was intentionally made female to contrast with the male-led monarchy. Statues and art were torn down and replaced, new symbols and a narrative were created to help the country forge a new identity for itself and move forward beyond the monarchy. Think about how the monarch might die in the cultural hive mind of your society before they might be removed de jure, de facto, politically, and everything else. This is especially common in post-colonial societies. I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and there's always this ongoing debate in the background about whether we should have the face of the king who never comes to us and we don't think about on our coins and our notes, instead of people like Te Whiti Rongamai, who led a pacifist movement against, colonial exploitation, or even just some of our amazing nature. Have I told you about the fat, flightless, useless kakapo bird, which, I kid you not, tires after chasing worms to survive? And sometimes a monarch isn't just a symbol of a different era, but a symbol of oppression and cruelty. I've been doing a lot of reading about Vietnam recently, and they used to have a monarch, the Nguyen dynasty, which was basically eroded over a century of French colonial rule when it was known as Indochina. They first died politically when the French eroded any power that they might have once had. When they abdicated in favor of the communists, they died culturally and ideologically. There was also kind of this awful irony where a lot of people kind of lost faith in the system because they saw the Nguyen dynasty as a relic on and representative of French colonial rule. I read a book recently by May Elliott called The Sacred Willow, which kind of touches on this. It's really, really interesting. I just want to mention it because it's a great book. If you like kind of historical accounts of that stuff, you should read it. What story does your country want to tell itself? What conflicting narratives are fighting for dominance in the cultural hive mind? And where does the monarch fit into any of these? This is also why
the culture is integration and understanding, because the beastmen have had a culture that's been around forever, but the tree doesn't really have its own culture. There's no history, no one knows what the world was like before. They only know it's the year 600, so it's been and the monarch's basically yeah, we were born out of the tree. And there's this whole backstory and stuff that people believe as their origin story that's not true. That when they find out that they're genetically enhanced of the original species, it kind of puts into question their own existence, right? The reason why the species exists for the avians was to be scouts, and the insectoids was to be vanguards, because there wasn't enough octopi in order to eliminate the beastmen, even with extremely superior technology. And still, even then, when the monarch pulled the moon out of the sky, he still couldn't eliminate all of the beastmen. So he resigned to having his own place and being fuck it. Because Anima only wants the best of the best consciousness to fill up the entire planet. If there's beastmen there, that's filling up space that could be for higher level intelligences, i.e. he gets more food. And Anima just is I need to get as much food as I can so I don't die before I eat all of existence. Which in and of itself, who knows if Anima will even even if, let's say, even if Gaia falls during the Infinite War and gets swallowed up by him, maybe just that delay alone is enough to make it so he can't devour all of existence. Or maybe he just can't devour all of existence no matter what he does anyways, no matter how much consciousness he creates. It's just not enough. And I want that to be something that plays through the reader's mind after they've finished the book. Then they can sit back and be the Infinite War. All battle of eternity, clashing of consciousnesses. One small, one mighty. One united with all, and one alone in the dark. What end there shall be to them, who not knows, but imagined it be, for I see such grand things beyond these imaginings.
Colonial powers often dismantled local monarchies as symbols their flashpoints for rebellion. In Hawaii, American and European sugar planters backed by US Marines overthrew the Queen and set up a supposed, quote, republic, which was in reality ruled by foreign US businessmen in order to set the stage for a later annexation. This is not throwing off the shackles of monarchy so much as imperial expansionism erasing local culture. Each of these are a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Ideological decline causes cultural decline, which causes political decline, which causes ideological decline, and around it goes. Slowly, it's revealed that the monarchy was built for a world which no longer really exists. It's changed too much, and it cannot survive here. They were a solution for problems of earlier societies, sure, but they weren't designed for the modern world. But this begs another question. Part 3. Democracy for who? All too often, we have this wonderfully optimistic vision of democracy, right? Where everyone gets together and everyone votes, and thereby we get the best solution, except who's voting and who gets to stand, and also, no, you're not allowed to vote, I don't like you too much. Like, who gets to vote first? It's almost always the landowners.
I personally think you should have to write a 500-word statement about the policies of the person that you're voting for. If you don't know the policies of the person that you're voting for, why are you voting? Like, what possible reason could there be for you to vote if you don't know the policies of the person you're voting for? Like, I don't understand how that could be such a hot take to some people. It's like, wait, what? How? Well, it's like, well, you're voting for them because of their policies. And if you don't know what their policies are, why are you voting for them? Well, someone told me to. Well, then you shouldn't be fucking voting. That's my opinion.
Which again, you can see as that sort of transition from the feudal system towards democracy, them trying to preserve some element of that system inside this new one which they know is coming. The people who own the land, the lords. But it's a really interesting question to ask how it then goes on from there. Like in 1862, New Zealand gave the vote to, of all people, gold miners. You didn't need to own land, but you did need a mining license, and this was a way to placate that section of the population and reflect the special place that they had in the New Zealand economy at the time. Then, in 1867, the Maori seats were created. These gave 4 seats to the indigenous Maori population to ensure they were in some way represented, especially given how much tax they were paying, which is good, but it was also part of a complicated attempt to bring the Maori population under Crown rule and break apart the communal ownership of land by the Maori tribes. And that's to say nothing of the fact that most of the polling stations were in European settlements and nowhere near the indigenous population. Well, think about how in Utah, women actually got the vote way earlier than other people around the world because the church thought they would vote for Mormon interests, and for polygamy in particular. But when that didn't happen, they actually stripped them of the right to vote all over again. Your world might have all sorts
They
of
gave
other
them...
dynamics at
That's
play.
hilarious. They gave them the right to vote because they were worried that they were going to lose. And then they lost anyways, so they took the right to vote away. Oh my god. I fucking love it.
in which the pillars which have held up the monarchy in the past still try to get incorporated into this new democracy with greater rights, greater representation, greater voices. Think about how those pillars too are changing and evolving and adapting to survive in this new environment. In the fantasy version of Europa Universalis 4, there's a place called Ambanar, and the emperor there is elected by people representing the elvish minority, halflings, dwarves, various human groups, bankers, mages, and a few other factions. This is really interesting because we can see certain professions getting the right to vote before others, certain species getting the right to vote before others, or with more or less representation, but also an understanding that these groups are equally important in some way.
And that's another thing is like because, and the reason for the concubine of the monarch and the viceroy being the basically president and vice president, and they're the two that are voted in for like heads of state, and all heads of state are essentially octopi, is for that same reason of the political leaders should also have a life and say in the monarchy. That was kind of the how you keep them together, is literally how do you merge and bond the monarchy and the democracy? Well, you make them literally one and the same. So only female octopi can be voted in as political leaders. Everyone else, so every avian and every insectoid in political office or in the government of any state inside of the tree is appointed and not voted in. The only people you can vote for are female octopi.
These are the pillars which hold up the monarchy, and so they're all being incorporated in some way or another. And that says a lot about how Ambanar understands itself. Think about who is incorporated into your democratic system, who isn't, and which powers can be depowered or empowered by how the democracy works. Like, gerrymandering is a thing. Maybe some groups get a more powerful vote, and that of course brings us to the upper house and the lower house. These are generally two different democratic bodies aimed at representing two different things in society, often with different rights and responsibilities. And as these evolve, the monarch loses power too. Like in the United States, the Senate represents the states equally while the House represents people by population. Or in the UK, the House of Lords represents a mix of clergymen, nobles, political appointees who get to stick around for ages. In Ireland, the upper house represents different interests and societies like unions, farmers, universities, major economic sectors. I actually did a paper on that. It's fascinating. It's kind of like Ambanar, actually. But that also means that these groups are often overrepresented. It's not one person, one vote like we often like to imagine. And this is all built on a fundamental assumption that representing different people groups, groups with different interests, is more important than representing any given individual themselves, which is controversial. I know. You can let your rage down in the comments at the Senate. I understand that. But you know what it is? It's also ripe for world-building tension, and that's what we're here to discuss today. Taxation to the lower house, the power to declare war to the upper house. Which powers does the monarch desperately hold on?
That's one thing that I'm like, I don't know how to make it exist, is taxation. Taxation only exists outside of the tree, and that's like beyond the scope and control of the monarchy. So that's kind of where Husai comes in as the bridge between the like monarchy and the outside world and the Adventurers Guild, is taxation and economic like prosperity. Because before the Adventurers Guild, everything was done through like a barter system of like, do things for me. Like, oh, I'll do this for you and then you get me back and do something for me, right? That's kind of like you were bartering, like I owe you like, why am I blanking on the fucking word? I keep, like, chores is the word that's going in my head, and I'm like, it's not fucking chores! What is the word? Uh, it's gone. But anyways, so the taxation goes through the Adventurers Guild to the Monarchy and is distributed back through the people so that the people in the tree... Because I'm like, well, where does the money that people inside of the tree get if there's no economy? So all of the economy is outside of the tree and then incorporated into the tree, and taxation is the way that the people inside of the tree get paid, so that they have the opportunity to buy things that are done by, like, brought into the tree by the Adventurers Guild. But actually paying taxes inside of the tree is... yeah, those don't exist. Even if you're if you're an adventurer, you'd be paying a tax anyways. It wouldn't have to do with, like, leave... because, like, yeah, the second you leave the tree, you're an adventurer, because only adventurers can leave trees, because you need to be an adventurer to leave the tree.
Which do they let go more freely and compromise? Often, different houses have different powers and responsibilities. The ability to create legislation, to block it, to modify it. Maybe they need agreement on certain issues. Who hasn't gotten a voice yet, but still wants it? Who hasn't been incorporated into the system? How does the democratic structure reflect certain values and dynamics and priorities within your society? All of these say a lot about how society understands itself, or how it has understood itself in the past, and it creates friction points. In empires, subjugated peoples usually don't get a voice or a vote and face significant barriers to having it. Democracy in this sense can become another structure which entrenches.
And it's one thing to say, like, this is the interesting thing that I like about it, is because normally the question is, oh, who gets to vote? But that's not the question we're asking. The question that should be asked is, who can be elected? And I think that's a little bit more interesting than who can vote. Because who can vote has been done a million times, but I don't ever see anyone saying who can be elected.
Is their subjugation. And underneath all of this, the lower house and the upper house, with their different powers, is a question. Who is the monarch ceding which powers to? I'm going to ask you a question which you've probably never thought about before. How should we divide people up into groups for voting? Like, we go by land area.
Class. And by class in the tree is chosen. So there's no kind of idea of greater class, like, oh, you're a miner, oh, you're a factory worker, oh, you're a salesman. Like, because no one's obligated to do anything. You just do whatever you want to do, and the way that the system works is, the more that something is in demand, the higher the wage goes for that job. So, the less people there are, the more incentive you create, the more people come. And that gives people to be able to fill the holes where they're like, this isn't a general hobby that I would do, but the incentive at the moment is worth me doing that job. And that's where the fluctuation in society comes from. And it's like, basically everything is done through a shadow training, where it's like, if you want to learn something, you just go up to someone and say, what do you do? Like, go up to the area and say, hey, is there anyone here who needs an extra shadow? And they'll be like, yeah, sure, come over here, I'll show you what to do. And it's like, there's no real worry about anything, because again, it's a utopia in a post-scarce society with no basic death. Like, nothing in the tree you could do is dangerous enough that would get you killed. Like, there's no real technology in it. It's all magic. So, there's no, like, let's say, grinding wheels that you might get stuck in or run over with something, right? And even if you did, well, you'd heal unless they ran over your head, and even then you'd heal. It's the complete severing of your head, basically. And even then, you could put the head back on after a certain amount of time, and like, you know, you could put it in, within like an hour, you could put the head back on, and you still come back to life. So it's like, it's fucking almost impossible to kill people inside of the tree. Which is why I want to have, so like, one of the characters dies, right? He basically is when the exodus of the Adventurers Guild happens, this character won't leave the tree even when the monarch says to, and he basically beats the shit out of a mob of like 300 people that want to get into the Adventurers Guild and burn down the Adventurers Guild, and then the monarch comes out and kills him and cuts off his head after he's been like dragged through the ground, because he was like beating the shit out of these people and knocking them out, but he didn't really want to hurt them. He was just knocking them out because he just knew how to fight and he knew how to knock them out. These are just civilians running up to him, and he's a fucking trained adventurer that's just never left the tree because Usai won't fucking let him, but he's still a trained adventurer, and he's just knocking the shit out of all these people, and then the monarch comes and stabs him through the heart, and a couple of other things that basically make it so like he's got like, you know, needles in his knees and stuff, so he can't really fight back, in his joints and stuff like that. And then the mob drags him through the street, and it's just like this blood streak across the ground, all the way up to the doors of the Adventurers Guild, where he's basically crucified to the doors of the guild, holding the doors shut, and in his hand he's holding his own head. And then Husai because the entire time people are telling him that that Zaid's dead, but Husai won't believe it until he sees the blood mark, and even then he won't believe it. And then he looks up and he sees that, you know, the sight of Zaid like that, and then he sees like Zaid's eye like move to stare at him, and then he's like running to fucking save Zaid, because he knows if he can put Zaid's head back on his body, Zaid will come back to life. But he doesn't know how much time he has, and he puts the head back on Zaid's body, and Zaid doesn't come back to life. And that's what breaks Husai the most, is the fact that if only he had been quicker, if only he hadn't hesitated, if only he hadn't despaired at that moment and fallen to his knees and thought the end was over, he could have saved Zaid. And that's what breaks him the most. But yeah, just kind of a lore dump there on one of the, what I think is the greatest moment in the entire book.
Most of the time, but that's on the assumption that your interests are most tied to where you are living. Not a bad assumption, but not always true. Like, think about that elvish minority in Anbanar, or the mages in The Witcher, or the Spacing Guild in Dune. Maybe you have more in common with these other people who might live nowhere near you, and you think you should be able to vote together. Maybe you have more in common with everyone who works in the arts or works in the mines. This is where you get to some of that kind of ugly world building, where a fantasy world full of different species who all have their own cultures and histories and don't necessarily mix very well can lead to all sorts of finicky problems and the tyranny of the majority. There is no perfect answer, but who your monarch cedes powers to, when, which powers, and what tensions remain as a result of that is a really interesting avenue for world building. Like, let's go back to Momopolis. You bring together this parliament to let those wealthy merchants consult on legislation, but there's also this powerful group of magic users who keep you in power because they believe that their magic is tied to your bloodline, so you give them the vote as well. Only the educated population starts to wonder if your blood is really magical at all, or maybe you just have a really rare blood type, and anyone who has it will do. Slowly, that ideological foundation begins to crumble. People move away from the state religion. You lose influence there. Eventually, you have to create two houses, one to represent the common people and the other to represent the nobles. The nobles are irritated because the peasants are getting a vote at all. Although you work with the two houses on legislation over time, eventually they force you to give up your powers of taxation and declaring war, even as your empire grows, even as your civilization grows more complex. And you decide, eventually, that you will become a powerful figurehead, a symbol for your people. Finally, the last people to get the vote are what the Momolopolis call the Kalnu, a species of human-animal hybrids who do a lot of the manual labor and have long been considered not real people.
That sounds like the Beastmen.
Affords them the vote. While you try to paint yourself as an important cog in the system of government, eventually the Republican movement erodes your relevance, finds new symbols for the country, and 10 generations later, your last heir abdicates and retires to a small house in the hills, with no political, cultural, or ideological relevance at all. No one even notices them putting out the press release. The monarchs deliver.
Like Mothman!
I should note that creating a parliament is only one of the ways
Exactly,
that monarchs
Queen.
might try to strategize around, incorporating these growing groups of people into the system that they control. There are lots of other ways that they try to do it too. They would bring them into the royal court, they would kind of have economic partnerships with them, they would give them monopolies, or the monarch would be the patron of, for example, colonial expeditions to the New World or through to Southeast Asia. All of these kind of give these groups more influence, but it deeply ties their influence to the crown itself. And all of this gets even more complicated when the monarchy is...
Well, it's like this, Queen. Do you know what Sasquatch is? Sasquatch is actually what happens when a human fucks a chimpanzee. You get a Sasquatch. A little bit more human than an ape, but not quite human enough.
overthrown with a revolution, which, by the way, of course, I did 3 videos on, and if you haven't watched those, you should go watch them. And if you haven't got my books, well, there's even more detail on monarchies and all sorts of stuff in there. If you like world building, which you're watching this video, which means of course you do. Link in bio. One more thing. I feel like it's impossible
I don't remember what I
to talk
said,
about
Queen.
how monarchies decline and fall without talking about World War I, which saw the end of the German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman monarchies. This is not necessarily the same process we have been describing.
I'm
but
retarded.
War and crisis, especially on a scale
It leaves my mouth,
that
it doesn't
we
exist
haven't seen
anymore.
before, does fundamentally challenge how we see the power structures.
I've moved
of
on.
others, whether they are worth it when they led us to this. World War I did bring people to question the fundamental assumptions of, monarchical power. But at the same time, this was a massive
That's my
shift
other half,
in
too.
the de facto
I think that's all
and
men.
power structures. It was a huge shift in the economy, in the
We just have way
makeup of
too much
society.
shit in our
We
heads.
see this with women demanding the right to vote.
When I mean shit, I literally mean
And at the
shit.
same time, the monarch
It's just
being
clogged
the
with
figure here
useless
provides a
fucking
really easy person to
garbage.
blame, when in reality, a lot of the time, these systems and how this all happened is very complicated. But it's hard to blame a system. It's hard to blame a
This is
complex
really bad
bureaucracy,
ADHD.
which doesn't have any one person at the heart.
I don't know if I have
Although at the same
ADHD or
time,
not,
monarchs
but
often were
I don't think it
deeply
really matters.
responsible.
Doesn't
Kaiser
change how I
Wilhelm
act.
And Tsar Nicholas II were very involved.
Doesn't
in
impact.
the war
It doesn't
and
feel
war
like it
crisis
impacts
too
my
has
life
the
in any
impacts of
way.
exacerbating existing issues which are already within society. It can bring out these cracks and make them worse. It can sometimes pave them over. It can make the country draw together and unite and put those aside. But especially after the war is finished, they can come out and they can be even worse. And I think we see that in World War I, and I think that was in part what led to a lot of the fall of these monarchies. This was especially the case in Austria-Hungary, where the existing
Says his mind is like there's 1,000 tabs open and there's noise coming from one of them and you can't find it. That's a great fucking analogy, Queen. That is actually a great fucking analogy. See, mine is I have 1,000 tabs open, but I'm looking at all of them at the same time. And I'm trying to, pick out the sounds. But as soon as I focus on one, I can pick it out. But as soon as I lose focus on it, it's gone. And it's like something can bring me back to it, but it's like there needs to be an external thing that reminds me about what I was saying. Otherwise, I have no idea. It's literally like it never existed.
ethnic tensions between the Slovaks and Czechs, the Bohemians, the Bosnians and Croatians and everyone, they all fragmented into their own states. And a consequence of that was basically this whole network which the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy was built upon collapsed. And it had no impetus, it had no real pillars beneath it after the state itself fractured. World War I is an incredibly complicated topic, but I didn't feel like I could, talk about the fall of monarchies without at least mentioning it in some way, and I encourage you to do more research. But I wanted to bring it up because, fantasy and sci-fi often do have big world wars, massive scale conflicts. And if that's the case, then think about how that's going to radically shape the relationship people have not only between the monarchy and the people, but also between the people and like the rest of the state apparatus that is around them, the system.
And that's why, like, the octopi that are at the bottom of the ocean, Fafnir, all the other intelligence on the other side that anyone knows about, that may even be, like, the parts of the, like, dark Adventurers Guild. Like, people that have been exiled from the Adventurers Guild. They've lost their, adventurer card, and they're no longer welcome, basically, in society. So they went and created their own society, and then they found the octopi and the rest of the dragons, and they're with Fafnir. At least some of them. Because they're also with the Warriors of Light. Which is like why everything is so interconnected. And the Warriors of Light, of course, are direct descendants of the Monarch, which they shouldn't be. There should be no direct descendants of the Monarch other than what's inside of the tree. They are remnants of an age when it was, because it's only been like 150 years since the Adventurers Guild was established. So there were a couple of things that the Monarch was like, all right, well, we can let our kids go out. They'll just die out there. Direct descendants, because the direct descendants have the genetic enhancements that the Monarch does. So they're like insanely better than the rest of all of the species. And that's why all 4 Warriors of Light are octopi. But then there's the Guardians. There's 3 of them are insectoids, 4 of them are avians, and 2 of them are yeah, there's 9, right? 3, 4, 7, 2. Yeah, 3, 4, and 2. Yeah, 4 insectoids, 3 avians, and 2 octopi. I'm pretty sure. Because I know there's 9 guardians. Because there's a leader of the guardians, and then there's 2 for each of the Warriors of Light to defend them. These are calls by Gaia on an instinctual level in order to protect the Warriors of Light, because she knows they're part of, like, they're an important part of the entire plan. Like, Husai is the beginning of the plan. The Warriors of Light are the end game. They're what she believes will actually be able to destroy the Monarch. If it ever comes down to that. Which, of course, they never actually, even with Husai, there's no fucking chance. Even with technology, even with magic, not even a chance of taking down the Monarch. Even completely isolated and separated from everyone else, even without the Viceroy at his side, even with all 5 of them going as hard as they can, maybe even 8 of them, depending upon Varius, Sid, and Smokey, hell yeah! Thank you for the kick, buddy guy. Super appreciate it, Smokey. How are you? How are you today, Smokey? Hell yeah. There you go. Keep at it, Smokey. Only 59,994 more.
As it works as a whole, the attitude towards the economic system. We saw massive overhauls with
Sounds
capitalism.
It's $6,000.
Happen at the end of World War I as well.
That's
It
not
also
that
had religious
expensive.
shifts in the 1920s, which you could read as a backlash to what happened.
It'll
in
take you like
World War
3
I,
weeks
and
to do it
monarchs
anyways.
are deeply intertwined with
Holy
religion.
shit, thanks,
They
Smokey.
justify their authority and their position through that. So you can ask how that's going
That's
to
insane.
impact their role. It's something I want you to think about. Now let's bring all of this together in a summary. But before we do that, go get my books. I know you want to learn, and they're better than my videos. They're easier to read, they've got so much more depth and detail and examples, and they're great, okay? They are fantastic. I love them, and I know you will too. Firstly, consider the political, social, economic, religious, and ideological foundations of your monarchy's power. How do they account for the de jure and de facto powerful factions in their society? Second, what happens when new kinds of power, new pillars, want to be incorporated into the system? This often arises from rising complexity, technological advancement, education, and economic prosperity. How does your monarchy answer the monarch's dilemma here? 3.
Ketchup
the monarchy
chips.
can die politically, culturally, and ideologically, often all at the same
They're
time.
fucking
4.
disgusting.
Consider how their ideological justification
Or
changes
the word,
with
whoever
fate.
invented
What
these
else
should
is
be
lost
shot.
in the process? 5th, consider how their cultural relevance fades and new narratives and symbols which come up in their place. 6thly, who gets to vote and how?
And whoever made original and ketchup red, why would you make them both the fucking red? I accidentally grabbed ketchup instead of original. Because they're fucking red. I also didn't know in Canada it's $18 minimum wage. Yeah, but that's like $11 American. No. Yeah. Wait. Or is it $8? It's like 1.2. It's like 1.2 or 1.3.